I want to follow on what we were talking about with your athlete there, and this concept that I hear, I've heard you talk about for many years around personal philosophies and how we all have one, but if we're not actively participating in forming this personal philosophy, then a lot of all the subconscious thoughts and debris and junk that thoughts that we all have can start to form your own personal philosophy for you. Can you unpack that a little more for us?
Yeah, there's two things in here. Let me pin that. Don't let me forget the core of your question. But you hit on something right before that I think is really powerful. Is that when we are going to an expert, a medical provider or whomever, right? Let's just do the medical world for a moment. And it's 15 minutes. It's not enough. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm classically trained as a psychologist, which means that we are trained to understand a cluster of symptoms represents likely this sort of diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So traditional medical models are working from a disease approach, a broken approach to say, what are the symptoms so I can categorize it so that I can, in my mind, I can pull down what best practices are for that symptom cluster, call it a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
In 15 minutes, if a doc doesn't take his pen out of his hand, me included, right? I don't work this way anymore. Like it doesn't take the pen out of the hand and really feel, and then to have a first principle to not diagnose, but to see and feel, then I'm not interested in that practitioner working with me. I like that they can categorize and clump and lump for speed and efficiency. That's great. That's really good to have a
Emergency
decision
medicine,
tree.
very good.
Yeah, efficiency medicine. And so that's cool. But I don't fit in boxes. Neither do you, Doc. Like our bodies are local, our minds are non-local. If you can get your arms around that for a minute, it's a cool concept. And then the symptoms aren't quite clean. So all I'm saying right now is that it takes time to really understand person. 15 minutes is the efficiency model, not the human flourishing model.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so from that point, if we slightly pivot over, time is expensive. So I get why we're in that model, right? I totally get it. But if we have the ability to sit with people that can afford like a real understanding of you, you will have better results in your life. And you won't box yourself into a set of symptoms or a cluster, call it a diagnosis, or over identify with the way the expert sees you. It is materially important that you first understand who you are. What are your guiding principles? And this is the segue into the core part of your question. If you abdicate and you allow the external world to over-index or influence in any way, really who you are, it's a long road. It's a long life from a very stressful point of view, because each time you go into a new setting, you have to calibrate. What do they think of me?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exhausting, right? And so we want to flip the model. And the most powerful people I know, the half percenters that are doing the thing that are changing sport, changing an industry, maybe changing the way we understand human potential, is that the external world does not influence their internal. And so they're working from the inside out. And so a personal philosophy is a fancy, like 2-word, little hyphenated clause there to say, to shorthand, like, what are your guiding principles? What are your first principles in life? And if you don't know them, you're going to get whipped around. So let's do this first principle work and write that stuff down. And then the next part of that is like, if you can't get it out under duress, it's probably just an academic exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So like you want to be able to get those first principles at least intellectually clear and anchored. And then you want to practice them in such a way that they are as automatic as your signature of your autograph. Like
Yeah.
it's as automatic as you possibly can. And that's how this work comes to life.
It is a daunting task, isn't it? I mean, because it's something that's dynamic and it's evolving and it's changing. So even in nutrition, so much of the work is mindset based and again relationship based to get people to actually comply. And I've been surprised at the feedback or the progress people can make when they do lean into this, but even surprised at how some very successful people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, particularly men more so than even women, if I have to say, can be a little bit resistant or almost it almost takes them off guard to actually have to pause, zoom out 30,000 feet and really assess their own values versus just kind of chasing, doing, going, achieving.
Yeah. Ditto. I understand. I agree 100%. Yeah. And I don't think though that there's a difference for the, let's say the difference between the half percenters and the 0.01 percenters, like they're driving for this.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh, this is great, and they're not caught in the, yeah, sometimes they're caught in it, but they understand the difference between the treadmill type of life versus like this purpose driven, let me use my imagination to see the future as clearly as I can. And then let me back in all the capabilities, technical, physical, nutritional, mental, that I need to be able to have that future even be a shot, so, and they also understand, Mark, that you're not even in the game if you don't know how your mind works. You're not even in the fucking game, honestly. So like you have to know how your mind works and how they work with emotions and the difference between emotions and feelings, and to be able to have command of yourself in any environment. Jesus, like it's a prerequisite in that space.
And that leads into today, we still hear a lot of this championship or bust mentality, right? It's winning a championship or the years of failure. Anything apart from the trophy means we haven't succeeded. And so, very binary, very ultra specific. And you've alluded to obviously vision here. So, can you differentiate between goals and vision and the potential pitfalls of the sort of, if we didn't place first, then we finish last?
Yeah, it isn't black and white easy.
It is easy. It's nice. Very straightforward.
Yeah, but it's there's many more colors, So if we just think about physics and some of the more physical forms, like, so the same holds true mentally. And so I mean, here's the deal is for me is that if I don't help a team win, I'm not asked back. So the reality is, whether it's business or sport, this is not just a grand experiment. Like there is a required outcome that is directly related to finances, and there's winning pays.
Yeah.
So like the investment by the owner is, might be binary, and it might have a little sensitivity to what it takes to win, which is a zigzagged up and down, very complicated approach of getting better, unless you get really lucky, And so it depends on kind of ownership and the philosophy that's guiding underneath. And the win or bust is, I don't know. I don't want to work for those organizations. It's just missing something uber sensitive about what really happens. And so they're kind of working in an alternate universe that is not how progress takes place. I don't know what more to say to that other than I haven't been part of a winning program that has ever said that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. But I didn't answer your question.
Well, I mean, obviously fear drives a lot of progress. The competition, the fear of failure pushes us to work harder, to practice longer hours. But it all can also, to what we started with in the discussion, can lead to that fight, flight, freeze mode where all of a sudden we can't express all the things we need to express, whether it's at work or on the playing field. And I've heard the quote, how, acceptance of the present moment is where fear cannot exist. And so, is that true? Can you, again, unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I'm not sure who the author of that idea was, but the present moment is where we have access to what is true. And so I don't want to get too esoteric here, but I'll do my best to make this as concrete as possible, is that what we're trying to do is to link this moment and the next and the next and the next, as many thin slices of a moment as we can together. And when we string a bunch together, we find ourselves in what scientists call flow. Okay, so the present moment is the entryway in to high performance. It's the entryway into wisdom. It's the entryway into experiencing the experience. So if I am nervous, pretending like I'm not is a fool's game, like it's one, it takes a lot of energy to fake anything, pretend anything. That's kind of a joke. So if I'm aware that I'm nervous and I can label it, so I've got some emotional intelligence to go, oh, this is nervousness. And then say, oh, it's actually, yeah, it's in my stomach. That's interesting. All right, cool. And then I've got a couple skills to be able to work with it. So just naming it decreases it.
Yep.
And a skill of breathing or self-talk that is grounded and true, and I'm not making stuff up like some self-affirmation bullshit, but like you're saying it, and that, or you label it, you recognize it without judgment and critique, which is the practice of mindfulness, essentially gives you that skill and ability. And then you've got some skills to work with it. So fear does exist. And if you're aware of it in the present moment, you can do something with it. What happens for many people is that the awareness game is not very sophisticated. So it's kind of like, imagine if we're at the top of a rapids, right? You and I push off and like we're cruising, is good. And then we can hear the rapids down the way.
Yeah.
And we know that we're going to kind of be up against something. And then all of a sudden we take a big chunk of time out of it. And then all of a sudden we're in the rapids thrashing. So that's what happens for many people, is it's all good when it's good, it's easy. And they know maybe something challenging is coming, but then they somehow lose their way in between all of those moments because they're worrying or thinking about other things or distracted by the present, anything that is not to do with the present moment. But time keeps moving, the river keeps moving. And then we find ourselves thrashing, and it's like, shit, I'm kind of a wreck. Like my heart's pounding, and someone walks by and they're looking like, hey, you good? And I said, yeah, I'm good. And I'm a mess.
Yeah.
Like it's like that joke of a sequence that I'm just describing is more common than I think any of us would want, but it doesn't, we don't have to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way.